Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored, Never Boring. It's a bit of an unusual video today because I wanted to explore a bit of an anomaly with Space Crusade, and in fact it is something that cropped up in one of my earlier videos. If you're a subscriber to the channel, you may know that I've been having a lot of fun recently playing Space Crusade, which is a Games Workshop and MB Games collaboration that went to retail in 1990. I've done numerous playthroughs, and in the very first playthrough I did, this card turned up. It reads, Orc Mekaniak. An Orc Mekaniak uses an experimental weapon. Any one Orc miniature may fire as though he has a Devastator. The interesting thing about this card is that there's no gun in the game called a Devastator. I think it's fair to assume that at some point in the game's development there was a weapon called a Devastator, and that was either a weapon that never made it into the final game, or a weapon that was renamed for the final game. Now, this isn't the only example of a reference in the final game to something that was removed or changed during development. Take a look at the Chaos Space Marine Commander Blip token, for example. It quite clearly shows the commander with a pistol and power axe combo, but the miniature only has a heavy bolter, and no, it didn't come with interchangeable options. The reason for this anomaly is pretty apparent if you look at the pictures of the beautifully painted miniatures around the edge of the box. Those miniatures are actually the original metal prototypes, and they look quite different to the mass production plastic models that made it into the game. The android and the orcs are much more hunched, the dreadnought is chunkier, and the Gretchins aren't capering. Most obviously, the Chaos Commander is carrying a power axe. So that's one little mystery cleared up, but what about the Devastator? To be honest, I'm not really sure. I seem to recall that back in the day I used to play the Orc Mekaniak card as if the orc had a missile launcher, and I think that's how the Amiga computer game handled that particular event. But there are plenty of things in the computer game that don't quite align with the board game, so that's not really evidence of anything. So let's dig a little bit deeper. Of course, these days when someone mentions Devastators, we think of Devastator Space Marine squads, but back in 1988, Devastators was the name of a boxed set of Imperial units for Rogue Trader. This is actually really interesting, and I wasn't aware of it until it was brought to my attention by subscriber John Middleton. The Devastators box included a squat mole mortar, a Space Marine land speeder, and an Imperial tarantula gun. Space Crusade aficionados will know that tarantulas eventually appeared in the Mission Dreadnought expansion. Does that mean the tarantula might have been originally intended for the base game and were given the Devastator title? It's a fun idea and at least halfway plausible, but tarantulas are pretty beefy and were really added to the game to give the Marines a fighting chance against all those dreadnoughts. And giving an orc that much firepower? Seems like overkill to me, unless the original intention was for tarantulas to be significantly less powerful than they were in the expansion. Let's assume for now that's not the case. I generally feel it's more likely that dropping the Devastator name was due to a simple change in wording rather than from excising whole weapons from the Space Marines' arsenal. But still, this was a very cool little trip down memory lane to check out some obscure sites that I didn't even know about until John pointed them out. And it's certainly food for thought. So let's instead flick through the rules book for more clues. Sure enough, there is another mention of a Devastator there. Scattered throughout the pages is a fun little story of a doomed Space Marine squad, told in recordings of broken Vox chatter. At one point, the valiant Marines come face to face, or more accurately face to assault cannon, with a Chaos Dreadnought. In the panic, the sergeant barks an order. Canna, bring the Devastator. The order is terminated when the sergeant is killed, at which point a Marine called Tenard engages the Dread with a missile launcher. So from that little moment, it's clear that Canna has a Devastator, and a Devastator isn't a missile launcher because Tenard's got the missile launcher. The plot thickens when we flick back a few pages in the story because there's another moment where the sergeant gives Canna an order. He says, Canna, bring up the plasma gun. So Canna is actually carrying a plasma gun, which seems like more than enough evidence. Well, some evidence, a bit of evidence, a straw at least, to suggest that the Devastator was the original name for the plasma gun. Now it is possible to muddy the water slightly here because the assault cannon is actually the only heavy weapon that isn't name-checked in the story. They mention plasma gun by name, they mention missile launcher by name, and then they mention Devastator. As they don't mention the assault cannon by name, there is an argument that Devastator is actually the assault cannon. Furthermore, even though Canna has the plasma gun, by the time he is summoned by his sergeant to take on the Dreadnought with the Devastator, 2 of his allies are already dead, and we can assume that one of those allies would have had an assault cannon. So it can be argued that this story covers the fact that the Marine with the assault cannon dies, and then Canna takes his assault cannon. But I don't want to do that. I'm sticking with my original notion. And that, I guess, is that. Case closed. But why were they going to call a plasma gun a Devastator anyway? That required a bit more digging, so I spent a bit of time on the internet, eventually finding a thread where someone pointed out that when Space Crusade was showcased in White Dwarf magazine, the Marines were listed as carrying a bolter, a missile launcher, an autocannon, not an assault cannon, and a flamer. It took me a while, but I found the issue in question. And, as a little aside, during my search I checked out White Dwarf issue 133 and came across this army deal for Ironbeard's Conquerors. This is actually the dwarf deal that I bought to start my old dwarf army when I was a young lad. It included 40 warriors, including dwarfs with pikes. Oh, I miss the dwarfs with pikes. 20 dwarfs with crossbows, 10 troll slayers, 10 giant slayers, an organ gun, and a, get this, free cannon. When I first got issue 133, I couldn't afford the £50 needed for this army, but about a year later I contacted the good people at Games Workshop by letter. No internet back then. I thought it was a tall order, but I asked if the deal was still available, and they put it together just for me at the same price. Some lovely person in the warehouse must have had a fun afternoon with that. But anyway, I finally found the Space Crusade miniatures in an heavy metal spread in issue 132. They were the same painted miniatures that adorned the Space Crusade box. So that was time well spent. However, sure enough, we can indeed see that the plasma gun has been painted with flames along it like a flamer. So, really it's probably as simple as that. The plasma gun was originally going to be a flame weapon called a Devastator, then somewhere along the way somebody decided the Devastator worked more like a plasma gun, so the name was changed, just not everywhere. And that's it. I don't think we'll ever know the real reason. I certainly can't find any interview or soundbite to explain it, and if it didn't crop up in the last 30 years, it probably isn't going to now. And was this really worth making a video about? Of course not. I think in my head I was probably thinking this was going to be like one of Guru Larry's wonderful and impeccably researched fact hunt videos. Only I'm not an investigative journalist, and I have neither the resources, industry contacts, or even patience to put together something that contains anything that even weakly hints at being a fact. Besides, the use of the name Devastator really only impacts the Orc Mech card, and as long as your game group agrees in advance what the card means, it really isn't a problem. For me personally, I'm going to continue using a little house rule. When the Orc Mech turns up, I roll a dice to randomly determine which kind of heavy weapon he gets. That way you get a little bit of chaos, some potential devastation, and then an unpleasant and messy demise when the mech blows up. What could be more orky than that? And that's it from me for now. Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider pressing the like button. If you really enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing if you don't already do so. And hopefully, I'll see you all again very soon. Bye bye everyone. Bye bye.